Samburu Reserve, mid-morning. The air was still and dry, the earth cracked open in lines beneath the sparse thorn trees. In the distance, heat shimmered off the exposed rock, warping the shapes of low shrubs and termite mounds. Patrols had been light that week. The rivers hadn't run in days. Wildlife moved at dawn or dusk, nothing stirred in the brittle hours between. But this time, something pulled them off the usual path. A ranger named Isaiah paused first. He tilted his head. Not birds, not branches, just a sound. High-pitched, fragile, and broken, like something caught in its own breath. He motioned forward and the team stepped quietly through the thorn thicket, boots pressing down sun-bleached acacia pods. They found him just beyond the bend, down where the dry riverbed flattened. A lion cub, maybe 7 weeks old, wedged low in the sand beneath a sparse cluster of brush. The body was curled so tight it looked folded. His eyes were nearly shut, the fur around them hard with dried discharge. Each breath was shallow, but he was alive. The sound had come from him. Not a roar, not a mule, just a soft, trembling cry that rose in short gasps, then stopped, then began again. His ears twitched once, but did not lift. His front leg was tucked beneath him at a strange angle, possibly sprained. The pads of his paws were dry and split. Beside him, the sand showed no tracks. No mother, no pride. Isaiah crouched low but did not approach. The team stayed several feet back. They watched, waited. One of them whispered, "Not more than a day or two alone, maybe less." The cub did not move. His tail barely flicked. When a shadow passed from above, a marabou stork gliding low, he flinched but made no sound. For the next 20 minutes they observed. No sign of other lions. No returning scent trails. The bush was still, except for the hot wind ticking through dry seed pods. Time stretched thin. The team debated quietly. If the pride had moved on, the mother might return. But if she had rejected him, or if she had died, the wait could mean his death. At this age, cubs rarely survive alone. Dehydration, predators, exposure, any one of them could end his chance by sundown. But if they intervened too soon, they risked separating him from a returning mother. The cub tried to shift his weight once and collapsed fully onto his side. His stomach was drawn in, ribs visible even beneath the coarse young fur. His breathing slowed again. The crying had stopped. Now there was only the faint twitch of his flank with every breath, as if each one cost more than the last. Isaiah stood. His boots shifted soft dust as he stepped back. "We wait," he said quietly, "but not long." They marked the area with subtle scent barriers, a blend of ash and plant oils, to deter scavengers, then moved their vehicle just out of the cub's line of sight. From a shaded rise, they waited. 1 hour passed, then 2. The sun crept higher. Still, no lioness, no call, no distant movement. By the time the light bent slightly west, the cub's body looked even smaller than before. He hadn't moved. The cry did not return. Only his breathing gave him away. Isaiah checked his watch, exhaled, and quietly stepped back down the rise. If they waited longer, he might die. If they moved now, they might still lose him. Stress alone could collapse his heart. But waiting was no longer the safer option. The cub didn't flinch when they returned. He made no sound when Isaiah knelt nearby. No struggle when the ranger slid his arms beneath the thin body, wrapping him in a cloth softened by years of sun and washing. The cub's eyes opened for a second, unfocused, then closed again. He weighed less than expected. As they lifted him from the dust and turned toward the vehicle, a small gust moved the brush behind them. Nothing emerged, nothing watched. The bush was silent again. If they moved him, he might not survive the transport. But if they left him here, he would not survive the night. The sound of the engine rolled out soft over the flat, dry plain. The wind moved in thin lines through the thorn trees. and the crying did not return. The road back to camp was slow. They drove with care over the uneven track, the cub wrapped in cloth, nestled between foam padding and a folded shirt beneath his head. He did not move for the first few kilometers. No twitch of ear, no paw stretch. His breath stayed shallow, but steady enough for now. Still, any movement might tip the balance. If the cub woke too fast or panicked, he could spiral into shock. If he stayed too quiet, they might be losing him already. Isaiah kept his hand near but did not touch. The cub's small chest lifted and dropped without rhythm. Now and then, his head listed to one side. At the edge of the reserve, they slowed near a bend of dry brush. The team had placed camera traps there months before. Motion-triggered, passive. But sometimes the lions passed through. If a pride had come near in recent days, the footage might offer something. They paused long enough for Isaiah to pull the memory card. No lion sounds echoed through the ravine, just dry wind ticking against the fence mesh. Back at the holding camp, the quiet continued. A veterinary technician waited by the shaded enclosure, where shade cloth stretched between steel poles. It wasn't a clinic, just a holding pen cleared of thorns and kept cool with a drip mist system. The cub was carried in on a soft blanket and placed on a low mat under the tarp. His legs were stretched for the first time, stiff but intact. No breaks. His back right paw was swollen from overuse. He hadn't fed in at least 2 days. The first goal was hydration. They didn't use bottles, only a narrow syringe tip, dripping glucose and rehydration salts line by line along his tongue. He didn't resist. His jaw remained slack for most of it. When it was done, they wrapped him again in the cloth and left him on the mat with nothing more than a bowl of water beside him. The camp returned to its routine, hushed and steady. No movement from the cub, no further sound. That afternoon, they checked the camera card. One by one, the stills loaded on screen. Mostly elephants, some buffalo, a flash of night hyena. Then, hours before the cub had been found, 3 lionesses crossing the dry ridge above the riverbed. None looked injured. One had blood on her flank, but it was impossible to tell if she had been hunting or wounded. No cubs followed them. No one said it aloud, but it hung there. The mother might have left him, or she might have chosen not to return. Perhaps she lost him in the tall grass. Perhaps she was nearby when humans approached and simply turned away. At sunset, Isaiah returned to the pen alone. The cub had shifted. One paw was stretched outward, the claws barely visible beneath soft pads. His eyes were still closed, but his breath was louder now. Not deeper, just more labored. The air had cooled, but his body still held heat from the afternoon. Isaiah knelt beside him and waited. He didn't speak for a long time. Only after the cub stirred faintly did he whisper, "You're not alone now." By dusk, the hills were full of quiet movement. Dung beetles rolled their spheres through the dust. A group of baboons clustered along the escarpment, chattering low before finding roost in the trees. The wind brought no new scent. The camera traps showed no returning figure. No pride had circled back. If she was coming, she should have come by now. The cub remained silent into the night. His limbs stretched once more, then stilled again. The wind pulled gently across the camp, lifting loose strands of cloth, rustling dry leaves near the gate. The stars were clear above, but the ground held its stillness. Nothing stirred near the fence line. Nothing called back from the ridge, and for the first time since they'd found him, he made no sound at all. The evening held a flat, golden hush. Shadows stretched low across the camp as the sun softened behind the western hills. Wind swept gently through the thorn trees, brushing dust across the open ground. The cub had not moved in hours. His sides still rose and fell, but more faintly now, each breath thinner than the last. The silence wasn't restful. It pressed inward, slow and worrying. the kind of quiet that came before a final slip. The other rangers lingered near the gate, keeping watch on the perimeter. They didn't speak much. Only a few nods were exchanged as Isaiah stepped inside the enclosure and approached the mat. He moved slowly, boots careful on the soil. The faded cloth he carried had once been part of an old ranger jacket, worn smooth over the years, soft enough not to scratch against fur. He folded it twice in his hands and knelt beside the cub. The small body was curled toward the back corner. One paw lay stretched, stiff. The eyes remained closed. His ears didn't flick at the nearby movement, and his chest rose no more than a whisper. Isaiah watched for another moment, then lowered the cloth. Gently, he lifted the cub's body into it, tucking the limbs close. There was no protest, no sound, just the slight shift of ribs beneath the cloth as the cub was wrapped and lifted. If they waited longer, the risk would only grow. Cubs in this condition could fade fast, their systems too fragile to hold out overnight. Hypothermia, dehydration, organ failure. Any one of them could end it quietly. Transport was dangerous, but so was stillness. Isaiah held the wrapped form close as he crossed the compound. Each step was steady. The wind had cooled now, and the first scatter of insects buzzed softly in the air. The truck had already been cleared of equipment. A mat was laid flat in the back seat, with a shallow bowl of warmed glucose solution resting nearby. Another ranger opened the door as Isaiah approached, and the cub was placed inside without a word. They began the drive toward the mobile unit stationed closer to the river corridor. It was a medical shelter. Temporary, canvas-walled, outfitted for emergency wildlife response. The road was uneven in places, worn by months of dry season use, and every bump was taken slowly. Inside the truck, the cub barely stirred, his nose pressed into the cloth. Only once, as the tires shifted over a low root, did a faint twitch run through his flank. The unit came into view just after night settled, a low cluster of canvas structures lit only by the dim orange of battery lamps. A veterinary assistant stepped forward as they arrived. No rush, no questions, just a nod and outstretched hands. Together, they carried the cub to a side room lined with straw mats and heat coils. The temperature had already dropped. Even in this part of the reserve, nights could bite deep, especially for something this small. The first measure was warmth. The cub was laid beside the coil mat, still in the cloth. His legs were exposed just enough to check the pads, still cracked, still dry. No external wounds, but his heart rate was erratic. His temperature hovered low. They administered a fluid line under the skin of the shoulder, small, steady drips of saline and sugar. He flinched at the needle but made no sound. For the next hour, they watched. A faint flicker of breath, a short, shallow twitch of ear. The signs were there, but faint. Nothing conclusive yet. The cub remained between waking and fading, his body caught in a thin stillness that could go either way. If he slipped into full shock now, they would likely lose him. But if he stayed calm, stayed warm, there was still a chance. Not a promise, just a chance. Outside, the hills darkened into quiet. Grass moved gently beneath the wind. Far off, the faint call of a nightjar echoed over the plain, and inside, wrapped in worn cloth and lit by low amber light, the cub breathed once more, softer than before, but still there. The canvas of night held steady over the mobile unit, broken only by the slow hum of a battery fan and the hush of soft footsteps moving between tents. Inside the treatment shelter, the cub lay curled on a foam mat, cloth still wrapped around his body, breath light and soundless. His eyes stayed closed, but his chest no longer stalled between breaths. The coil mat beneath him pulsed with heat, holding his core temperature just high enough. His paws were tucked close now, no longer rigid. Not healed, not yet strong, but no longer slipping. They didn't feed him immediately. First, they watched. A full hour passed, then another. The intravenous drip worked slowly, a thin line under the skin of his shoulder. His hydration began to stabilize. When one paw stretched, the vet assistant marked the time. When his ear twitched at the shuffle of boots outside, she nodded once, quietly, and prepared the formula. Milk was warmed to body temperature and mixed with electrolytes. It was a lion milk substitute, a precise balance of fats and proteins designed for orphaned cubs. The syringe held no more than 3 milliliters at a time. Anything more would risk choking or rejection. She knelt low beside him, moved the cloth just enough to expose the edge of his muzzle, and touched the tip of the syringe to his lip. He didn't respond at first, not even a flinch. His mouth stayed slack, but on the third drop there was movement, a faint reflex of tongue. Not hunger, not yet, just reflex. A drop touched the edge of his gum and slid past. Then another. The fourth he swallowed. The fifth he licked. She whispered only once. "It's okay, little one." It took 40 minutes to feed him the full dose. They stopped every few seconds, letting him rest. A few times his breath grew shallow, but each time it returned. By the end, he shifted his body slightly toward the warmth of the cloth, pressing into the familiar texture. No sound, no cry. But his tongue moved again at the final drop. The ranger returned just before dawn. Isaiah stepped quietly into the tent and crouched beside the mat. The assistant gave him the update. Stable, responsive, minimal twitch in both ears, but still severely weak. Not out of danger. If the cub stopped feeding, if the fever returned, the margin was gone. Cubs this small could crash with no warning, but this one had taken milk. The ranger looked at the curled body, the dust-colored fur that now looked softer under light, the faint rise and fall of ribs. The cub didn't open his eyes. His tail didn't move. But when Isaiah gently touched the cloth by his shoulder, the cub's ears shifted. A slow, quiet flick toward the voice. They named him Loka. It was the Samburu word for left behind, the one who was no longer with his pride, no longer claimed by the bush. A name to mark what had happened. A name to carry forward, even if no one knew what came next. Over the next hour, Loka remained still. No protest, no cry. His ears continued to twitch faintly at soft sounds. The click of a zipper, the closing of a medicine box, a low murmur from the assistant outside. He showed no signs of panic, no signs of hunger. Just quiet, just small signs. Later, they prepared a second syringe. If he refused it, they'd need to consider tube feeding. Riskier, more invasive, but sometimes necessary. But when they touched the tip to his mouth again, he opened slightly. Not enough to suckle, just enough to take in what was offered. His tongue flicked, his jaw moved once, then again. He drank the second round. If he could maintain feeding, they could delay further intervention. If he kept his temperature stable, they wouldn't need to administer additional stimulants. If his breathing remained quiet, he might sleep through the day. The tent stayed dim as the sun climbed outside. Light filtered through the canvas, pale and muted. Dust shifted under the edges of the door flap. Outside, the land held its silence. Inside, the cub remained tucked in a single fold of cloth, his flank rising with a slow, delicate rhythm. One paw stretched just beyond the mat, the claws retracted and clean. The name Loka had been written on the corner of the clipboard by the door, and for now, that was enough. By the third morning, the feeding routine had steadied. Loka now took milk 5 times a day, each session measured in soft drops and long pauses. He no longer needed warmth coils through the afternoon, and the drip line had been removed. He still did not stand for long, but when he lifted his head, it no longer swayed. His ears tracked sound now, slow turns toward quiet footsteps, low conversation, or the rustle of canvas doors. No calls came from the hills. No lioness circled the edge of the compound. The scent traps placed near the bush line remained undisturbed. Motion cameras showed only wandering jackals and the curved silhouettes of eland moving at dusk. Whatever pride had passed through the riverbed that week had not returned. Loka did not call for them. Not once. In most cases, cubs of his age vocalize when isolated. Short chirps, rough mules meant to summon a mother. But Loka never made a sound. When the door of the tent opened, his head lifted. When someone entered, his body stilled. But no cries came. No restless pacing. Just a long, watchful gaze. The team adjusted to him slowly. They didn't crowd. Movement near him was kept low and slow. Touch was only for medical care or feeding. But he watched Isaiah most. The ranger checked on him each day near dusk, kneeling quietly beside the mat or settling onto the low bench outside the tent. Loka would rise on unsteady paws, walk no more than 3 steps, and lie down again just close enough to share the space. Sometimes his head rested over his front legs, eyes half closed. Other times he stared outward into the long grass just beyond the canvas. By day 5, the fever was gone. His joints, once stiff and hesitant, began to flex more freely. When the breeze passed through the enclosure flap, he turned his head toward it. His movements remained slow, often interrupted by long rests, but the limp in his right paw had lessened. He no longer curled into himself the way he had on that first day. On the 6th morning, as Isaiah crossed the compound, he heard the soft thud of movement behind him. He turned to see Loka, low to the ground but walking. Not running, not strong, just following. 3 steps, a pause, then more. The ranger waited, said nothing. When Loka reached the edge of his boot, he lowered himself into the dust and folded his limbs beneath him. Isaiah exhaled quietly and turned back toward the supply shed. The cub didn't rise again until he returned. That evening, the ranger didn't enter the tent. He sat outside on the canvas stool and waited. Loka came out unprompted. He walked with care, body low, movements unsure but without panic. When he reached the shaded corner by the tent flap, he lay down slowly, pressing one side of his body to the warm earth. He didn't curl this time. His front paws extended, one ear flicking lazily at the sound of dry leaves drifting across the ground. No one told him not to follow. No one blocked the flap. They had not begun discussing reintroduction. Loka was still far from release-ready. His strength remained fragile. His immune system was recovering, but the weeks ahead would determine his fate. A single infection could change everything. A drop in appetite. A sudden limp. Nothing was guaranteed. If he declined again, there might not be a second recovery. But that evening, he remained alert. He watched the shadows stretch. His eyes tracked a hornbill in the acacia tree. His body held no tension. No cry rose from him. Only stillness. Only breath. The sun lowered behind the escarpment. The ranger rose to his feet and Loka slowly rose as well. Together, without sound, they moved toward the quiet darkening of the compound. The wind shifted through the dry brush beyond the fence. The grasses bent once, gently, and stood still again. 3 weeks had passed. The winds carried dust now, curled from the edge of dry gullies and swept across the compound roofs in long, silent ribbons. The heat had shifted, not intense but pressing, thick with stillness. Loka had grown stronger. His gait had lengthened. The limp, while still visible, no longer slowed him. He spent his mornings beneath the acacia near the outer fence, often facing east, eyes half-lidded, watching the rise of the ridge. He remained silent, always. No vocalizations, no signs of restlessness. He followed Isaiah without command and returned to the tent without coaxing. At night, he curled near the ranger's stool, tail flicked once across his hind leg, and did not stir until dawn. Then, one morning, just before first light, a figure appeared on the ridge. She was seen first by a scout on the far rise, a lioness, thin across the flank, ribs faintly visible beneath her coat. Not starved, but worn. She moved slowly down the ridge path, staying just above the boundary posts, then circled wide. She didn't pace, she didn't call, she only watched. Her body language was quiet. No aggression, no crouch, no charge. Just long, deliberate steps across the edge of the low scrub that bordered the compound's north side. She remained for nearly an hour, eyes fixed on the shade structures and canvas walls, then moved out of sight. At midday she returned. This time, closer. Not far from the holding pen. Just past the stand of elephant grass. Her head stayed low, ears upright. She stepped near the outer fence but did not touch it. The wind blew toward her. The scent of milk, humans, dust, and canvas carried over the dry grass. She turned her head once toward the medical tent, then stopped, sitting on her haunches, still as stone. Inside the enclosure, Loka froze. He had been resting near the mesh panel, eyes partly closed, tail twitching now and then at flies. But when the lioness came into view, he stood. His body stiffened. No sound came from him, no step forward, no call. But he stood, front legs slightly apart, head tilted toward the scent moving across the clearing. They watched him from behind the canvas. Isaiah approached slowly and knelt just behind the mesh. He did not speak at first. Only after a minute passed did he say quietly, "She's not wild anymore." The words were not about behavior, not a statement of danger. They were observation, her calmness, her silence, her willingness to stay within sight of humans. A lioness with a pride would have moved quickly. One with cubs would never come this close. One with nothing left, maybe, would linger. The team moved with care. No one startled. No one made sudden movements near the pens. For the next 3 days she returned each morning before sunrise and again near dusk. Always the same rhythm. Watch, sit, wait. Never cross the final line. Loka changed too. He no longer followed Isaiah out to the water trough. He stood near the fence instead. Long, still hours, paws planted, tail still. He didn't call, but he did not look away. The question, unspoken but felt, grew heavier each morning. If she was his mother, she had returned late. But she had returned. If she was not, her behavior broke patterns. She lingered without claim. She moved without threat. The stakes now had shifted. If they intervened, forced introduction, barrier removed too soon, Loka could be injured. A lioness unfamiliar with him might attack. If they waited too long, she might disappear. That evening she lay near the far side of the compound in a low patch of dust beneath the acacia. Her breathing was steady. Her eyes half closed. The wind had softened. Inside the pen, Loka remained pressed against the fence line, watching. Neither moved for hours. And just before dusk, when the sky turned to pale orange and the dry grass bent gently toward the east, they stayed like that, one just inside, one just out, not meeting, not calling, but not leaving either. The morning began with no change. The lioness returned just before first light, her pace as slow and steady as the days before. She circled the compound perimeter without sound, pausing at the same places, resting in the same dust-worn hollows. Loka rose from his mat inside the pen without cue. He stood facing the northern fence, tail low, ears steady. He didn't pace. He didn't cry. But he watched. By now, the entire team had seen the pattern. The lioness arrived, waited, and left. Loka waited, watched, and stayed. Neither had broken that rhythm. But on this day, something in the air felt settled. The lioness didn't sit at a distance. She walked the full length of the fence line and stopped just meters from the eastern corner, where the ground dipped slightly near a weathered log. She lowered herself into the grass and remained there, eyes half-lidded, gaze fixed through the wire. Loka approached slowly from inside. His body language stayed neutral. Low steps, no tension in the shoulders, no raised hackles. The staff didn't speak. They didn't move closer. Only Isaiah knelt behind the low canvas wall, watching without interruption. The cub reached the edge of the fence. He didn't press his body against it. He didn't call, but he stopped just in front of her. The lioness lifted her head. Their eyes met. For a long moment, nothing moved. There was no sound between them, no growl, no shift of dominance or posturing, just two still figures facing each other, thin strands of mesh between. Loka's tail swept once across the dirt, slow. The lioness blinked. The team didn't act quickly. They waited through the heat rise of late morning. Shadows stretched between rocks. The insects shifted across the ground. Loka lay down, facing her. She remained still. Once she rolled slightly onto her side, a gesture more common in lions at ease. A sign of no threat. Isaiah stood and walked slowly toward the gate. If they were wrong, the cost was high. Cubs attacked in failed reunions could be fatally injured in seconds, and if the lioness was unfamiliar, her behavior could change with proximity. But the risk of inaction also hung heavy. If she was his mother, and if they delayed, she might vanish again, and this time for good. The gate was unlatched with quiet fingers. No noise, no sudden shifts. Isaiah didn't open it wide, just enough. The first panel eased outward, the hinge wrapped in cloth to muffle its movement. Loka stood. He didn't hesitate. His body crossed the threshold in 5 steps, each one measured but not slow. He didn't look back. His paws touched the earth beyond the pen, then paused. The lioness had not moved. She remained lying in the grass, but her head now fully lifted. Loka took 3 more steps. At 2 meters, she shifted. A low, barely audible chuff escaped her throat. Not warning, not threat. A greeting. The sound lionesses make to calm cubs. Loka stopped, tail twitching once. Then he moved again. The final steps were silent. His head lowered slightly, not submissive, just soft. Their bodies touched at the shoulder. No swat, no recoil, just contact. The lioness leaned her neck across his back, slow, curling around him. Loka folded in, pressing his face against her flank. She licked once along the side of his ear. His tail moved gently, side to side. They remained in that position for minutes. The air held still. From the edge of the clearing, no words were spoken. There was nothing to say. Later, they walked, first together through the brush near the log, then along the outer boundary, not quickly, not hidden. The lioness led. Loka followed, close enough to touch but with his own rhythm. By the time the sun tilted west, they were gone from sight. Only soft tracks marked where they had moved. The gate remained open, just slightly, as the wind pulled across the grass and brushed against the emptied shade. The sun rose without warning, just a slow push of light across the thorn trees, sliding over the dry stone and into the open yard of the compound. The wind was soft, carrying the faint scent of dust and morning dew from the river's edge. No voices stirred yet. The camp remained still, and the gate to the enclosure, the one left slightly open the evening before, hung untouched. Inside the enclosure, the mat was empty. Loka was gone. There were no drag marks, no scatter of disturbed prints. The soil held only a faint crescent where his body had rested, and a single shift of powdery dust near the opening. Just enough to say he had moved on his own. Just enough to show he had followed her. No one had heard them leave. The lioness had come and waited for days, then stepped through the fence without sound. And the cub, still young, still slight but walking, had gone with her. No alarms, no chase. Just a quiet decision made under the fading dark. The team gathered slowly. No rush. no calls made over the radio. Isaiah was the first to check the edge of the boundary, scanning for signs of motion or paw prints in the loose topsoil. But the wind had already moved through, covering what little might have been left. A dry leaf fluttered near the gate and curled in on itself. By the time the others joined, nothing remained to search. The lioness had led him out into the land where she came from. Whether pride waited for her or not, whether she had chosen a solitary path, whether she was his mother or only one who stayed, no one could be sure. But she had returned, and Loka had followed. There had been no collar on her. No identifying tags or ear notches. If she had a history with the reserve, it was undocumented. If she had ever lost a litter, no record showed it. What mattered now was that she had found him, and, more quietly than anyone could have planned, they had left together. In most cases, rescued cubs are raised by hand, fed, housed, conditioned, eventually relocated or kept in managed conservancies. Rarely are they returned to the wild without structured transition. The process is complex, it's slow, and it often ends with separation. But here, nature had done what the system could not predict. They had not intervened with force. They had not rushed reunion or withheld it out of fear. They had waited, risked uncertainty. And the result was something quiet, something complete. For the rest of the morning, no movement came from the ridgeline. The sky remained pale and open. The heat had not yet climbed. A few birds stirred along the branches above the water tanks, and a lone oryx moved slowly through the acacia, stopping to graze along the outer fence. Loka had needed everything they could offer: warmth, silence, patience, restraint. But he had never truly been theirs. Even when he followed Isaiah's footsteps, even when he lay curled at the ranger's side, he was not lost, only waiting. The dust held no answer, no line of prints to follow, just a stillness along the ground and a gate that now swayed gently on its hinge. The sun touched the corner of the mat inside the tent, and the wind brushed low across the grass as it moved on.